Thank you very much for that wonderful introduction. And please forgive me. I've ripped cartilage in my knee from a tennis injury. So rather than standing up and parading around, I'm going to be sitting here. And it was interesting when I was approached and asked to give a talk around major trends. It's a fascinating topic. And we could have what I hope would be an interesting, entertaining session, if you like, about things that are going on, and we will touch on some of those. But in terms of things that are relevant to you, could I just ask a question? Just go around the room, what are concerns that you have at the moment? Broadly speaking, that are affecting your business? Markets, uncertainty.
I think the B word is on most people's minds.
How many of you believe your business is being affected by the B word?
Not at the moment.
No? Yeah?
Certainly, we've suddenly been affected, which had never occurred to me. My husband is disabled. We have a Motability car. We like the Citroen C4. Motability won't set a price on it because Citroen want some sort of idea of where Brexit's going, and I thought we're going to have to pick another car. I'm not waiting that long.
Right. So that's B concerns. Other concerns?
Staffing issues.
Sorry?
Staffing issues.
So actually being able to hire people.
And managing what you've got.
Right. Okay. Has that been... Is that due to growth, or is that due to growth?
Yeah.
Okay. So finding staff and managing them.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
Yeah, reliable. Yeah.
Okay. Any others?
I think the speed of change, the conversations I have with people is that they feel like the speed of change is speeding up and exceeding their ability to understand it and engage with it.
Got you.
I just think generally,
Yeah, I
but
think you're right.
specifically, yes, technology, online technology, the stuff that you have in your pocket and you use, a lot of change and a feeling of disconnect, especially when it comes to the big companies and what they can do.
Mm-hmm.
I've got an app on my laptop and I can't delete it, and that's by design, not due to some glitch. There are workarounds, but it feels like it's not your technology when somebody else can dictate what is on your machine. And that general feeling of, I don't know, I need somebody to explain all this to me because it's just beyond me, and leaning on people for that, and then making the choice of that person. Are they a good person? Do they actually know what's got their finger on the pulse, etc.?
Yeah.
That is a general trend I see, specifically around websites and online world, but in more general sense for technology.
Okay. Okay.
And even in social media, where suddenly it pops up and says, "Oh, you don't do it that way anymore."
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Well, listen. As we go through, if I'm going to be watching you closely because I was very, very lucky early in my career to work with Desmond Morris, who some of you may recall as writing Man Watching, Ape Watching, and Desmond taught me how to read body language. So I'll be watching you closely. So apart from snoring, which will give a pretty good indication, I'm going to try and read you to see whether what I'm talking about seems to be relevant. Let's start with technology first of all. If we look at general trends, one of the problems that we've had for a very long time with technology is the idea that whatever's new must be good. So whether it's, I spent part of my career at Nokia, we would bring new phones out, and clearly every new phone had bells and whistles. Every operating system provider, technology provider, when you were bringing a new product to market, you needed to get the marketing budget spent raise awareness and cause people to upgrade. Okay? And so we have actually, for a long time now, been in the cycle where everything that's new is deemed to be good. In terms of, and that continues. If one looks at the marketing budgets, if you're doing filming for companies, there are marketing budgets there because everyone's launching a product. Whether people want it or not is another matter, but they're launching it, and so they're looking for any publicity that they can get. One of the, and there are a few interesting areas that clearly have been getting a lot of attention. So if we talk distributed ledgers, blockchain, Bitcoin, when we start looking at cryptocurrencies, this all sounds fanciful, and we suddenly see this dystopian image of dark web and people doing very naughty things and all the rest of it. Please forgive my French, and I apologize because this is going to be videoed. There is a hell of a lot of bullshit out there. Okay? So with regard to blockchain, yes. Blockchain as a distributed ledger, as a technology, is deemed to have advantages in certain areas. Will many of you be directly affected in your businesses? Highly unlikely, at least for the time being. One of the areas that it's, in terms of trends, that we're seeing at the moment is a recognition that actually it could be very suitable in those environments where you don't trust people. So if you don't trust people, then it can be great. And therefore it has applications in identity and other areas. But unfortunately, any of you that have ever been involved in the marketing of a new product, a technology product, will know that you start singing its praises internally. Then you start working with your comms team and you start working out the message to go externally. And then you work yourself up into an extraordinary lather in which you now realize that whatever your product or solution is, it actually solves most of the world's problems. And if only everyone else woke up to buying this whatever, then world hunger would be sorted by next Tuesday. And that is a cycle that's ongoing. What's more interesting, and that BS has been going for a long time and will continue to. What's an interesting underlying trend? An interesting underlying trend is the fact that we've seen a move from attention economics to surveillance economics. Now, in attention economics, this was seen particularly in radio and TV, basically in broadcast. If you could get an audience for your content, you could sell advertising. Newspapers were built on this. Newspapers then realized, this is old tech. Newspapers realized that you could actually engage with your audience far more effectively if you had a letters page. So readers not only could give their opinions to the newspaper, but their letter might appear in the newspaper, which would cause them to buy more copies. Which is why every local newspaper has done for donkey's years, you have a bunch of photographers going to every possible event to take pictures of people so that people will buy the paper because they've appeared in it. So this was attention economics. This grew. And what we've seen with social media has followed exactly the same path. And other laws have applied and have been demonstrated to be entirely relevant, one of which is Metcalfe's law. Metcalfe's law says that the value of a network is the square of the users. Put that simply, if you had the world's first telephone, it's bloody useless. If someone else has got one, you could call them. If you had two other people you could call, and so it grows. And so clearly there's been a desire to get the largest possible audience, the largest possible reach, and then monetize that with attention economics. Now we have seen people waking up to this and realizing that there have been fundamental problems with privacy and surveillance. And so people, the vast majority of people at the moment, all surveys that I've seen, show that people are greatly concerned about privacy. They also feel helpless in what they can do to protect their privacy. So in terms of using certain apps that enable you to see where other people are, I would just say be careful. Rather than getting into that debate, how many of you have got a smart TV? Yeah? How many of you have changed the privacy settings on your smart TV? So the rest of you are allowing LG, Samsung, whoever, I'm not picking on those two companies, but to actually listen to conversations and watch you in the house when they want to. And yet, if we said, is privacy important? I think we'd all agree it is. And yet, there are basic things around us where, because we can't be bothered to read manuals, because the T's and C's associated with technology are so ridiculous, I think Apple's T's and C's are longer than Hamlet. Okay? When you see this kind of nonsense, people just assume that surely no one would do anything like that. It's happening. And what's also interesting with this is that in terms of reach, we see a surprising number of people that are locked into broadcast. What I mean by broadcast is they will happily put their marketing message out. They will happily use MailChimp. They'll use all manner. They'll build up their databases of people to send out messages which are seen as being quirky, interesting, hopefully with a bit of value. But do they actually want to engage with anyone? No. It's incredible to look at the trend in the telecoms world on how many people don't make phone calls. So, the argument is, recently said by people, you use text. If you receive a text, it's because someone wants something urgently from you. If you get something on WhatsApp, they probably want something. To get a phone call, well, it's some strange person from a call center in some part of the world telling me he's a BT or a Microsoft engineer and how everything is about to come to an end unless I send money immediately somewhere. It's incredible how we have forgotten about engagement. And we see a backlash occurring on that at the moment. And it's taking many forms. So as I'm going through this, I do want to try and touch on things that will be relevant to your own businesses and what you're doing. But one of the aspects that has occurred is people are feeling helpless. They're feeling disenfranchised. We've seen that in a number of places. Those of you that were familiar with the Gilets jaunes in France. So the protests that occurred in largely rural areas, protesting at the money being spent in Paris and the fact that the Paris administration, central government, was not listening to the regions, is occurring in many other places. It's occurring here. We saw with the referendum, we actually saw from research undertaken at the time that many regions felt no one was listening to them, and voting leave was a protest vote because Cameron was seen as supporting it. So this was a royal two fingers to Cameron and central government, not thinking about implications because no one knew what they were. This disenfranchised approach is taking an interesting form. One of them is the growth of localism. So we're starting to see in many places environments where people are saying, you know what? We should actually be working more effectively with people locally. So it's marvelous to be able to list off that we have prospects, we have customers around the world or in distant parts of the UK. But in reality, how much business is actually available around us that we're missing? And not only is it business, but also the implications of this. So real estate, an example. If I look here at the hub, we are starting to see a realization that we should not be focusing on technology as the answer to everything. There's a nice cuddly feeling that, could be written on the side of a bus that implies that that new product coming through is going to take us to utopia and everything's going to be fine. Okay? It's not. Let me give you an example of some of the problems we face. One of the great trends at the moment is protection of the environment, a realization that we have to do something to save this planet. What's interesting about the discussions and the movements that are taking place is that this is not limited to one generation. This is a multi-generational thing. What's interesting is that for many people, the trigger point to change behavior patterns was Attenborough's documentary and the realization that, for example, plastic was a great problem. We have seen a movement which is taking, we're all aware of it. But what's bizarre is that many people, have looked at this in isolation, as let's focus over there to what could be done with recycling, and black plastic is bad. People wander into a supermarket and there are loose bananas there. Now, bananas have got a remarkably clever packaging system. Okay? It's called a skin. Okay? And this skin is great because when you take the bananas off the tray, you ship them, they're green, and gradually over time, they actually change to yellow. And you can see whether the banana is good or bad. It then goes through an amazing supply chain, in which they're transported around the world, and they end up in your local supermarket. And many of the supermarkets now put them there, loose, for you to go and weigh to decide how many you want. And then you see all these people that pick up their bananas, and they go to the scales, and out comes a little ticket. And what do? They stick them in a plastic bag first. Now, I just have to share with you, there is no need for you to put it in a plastic bag. You can put the sticker on the skin, and it works. Okay? And it's really bizarre the way people miss many of these things. At the moment, we have a lot of work going on around electric vehicles. And certainly, back in 2012, a group of us at Surrey University came up with the notion of creating a new research site, a centre, and we created the 5G Innovation Centre. That was 7 years ago. And the world now has woken up to 5G, and we'll go into 5G in a second. But at the same time, people were starting to talk of connected autonomous vehicles and clearly electric vehicles. And these were seen as marvellous. Why do I need to learn to drive? I'm going to have vehicles that are coming to my door, and everything is going to be hunky-dory. And a lot of people bought into this. If you actually look at the CO2 emissions resulting from transport, you can use new technologies. We had Dieselgate, we've had a number of other things that need to be addressed, but there's one simple thing that we could do: travel less. Travel less. So why is it that one can stand on any of the major railway stations on the platform in the morning? You're going to London, so you're going to be seeing it, I'm sure. You can stand up there and you are surrounded by the glums. You see these poor individuals who look so depressed that you just keep thinking, stand back from the edge. Stand back from the edge. And then everyone steps into the train and off they go. And the train is marvellous. I mean, in terms of efficiency, in terms of energy, consumption, and the rest. But unfortunately, the majority of people that have got onto that train have driven there from somewhere. They've parked at the station, and then they go up. They detest the journey, but they go into London. Why? Why do we have this compulsion to live and work in major conurbations when most large organisations have realised that the cost of actually having headquarters is prohibitive, And so they are encouraging their workers to work from home and do various other things. The opportunities for local workplaces are enormous. If we had more local workplaces, hubs such as this and others, we could dramatically reduce the amount of travel that people are doing. However, we also need to be very clever in how we use these facilities to ensure people genuinely are using them. Now, there are some people who work from home. I'm sure many of you spend a lot of time working from home. And you'll know that when you work from home for a long time, yes, you've got internet access. Hopefully, you've got good broadband service. Yes, you can make phone calls, but you don't. Okay? And you know that you perform a very important function for Ocado, DPD, DHL, Royal Mail, because invariably you're being disturbed from whatever you're doing to go and answer the door to collect a package that is actually for your neighbour that they've ordered online. You are in a situation where actually your ability to work is damaged, and after 3 days in that environment, cabin fever often sets in, okay? And you're doing useless stuff. We need to look at the way we're working. We need to look at time. And one of the other trends that we're seeing at the moment is focusing on space and time from a new perspective. So just as with transport, if we can cause people to use public transport, shared vehicles, to reduce usage of cars, we can make an extraordinary impact. Quite apart from not sticking things on bananas. Yes, sir.
Sorry to interrupt, just one interesting observation. A recent study by a researcher in America was looking at the use of autonomous cars.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a predicted efficiency of use of road space for cars because they'll be able to travel closer together because there will be networks and all the rest of it. So he wanted to see how people's use of an autonomous vehicle that could literally do whatever they wanted it to do would affect their use of it. And the best industry guesses of increased capacity on the road because people would be sending their car to go and pick up their kids, or once you picked up the kids, drive over there and do this, that, the other. So he ran a study, and the easiest way to do it was to give people a chauffeur. Now, there were only about 60 people in this study, so it's not comprehensive in any means, but give you a flavour. And what he found was what he termed zombie journeys. In other words, the car is empty, although it was the chauffeur, went up by 83%. People literally valued their time more than actually driving somewhere, so they'd just send the car off to do whatever it needed to do and would stay at home. And the people most likely to do that were the elderly. But it was an interesting study, and he's expanding it to see if this follows through. And he reckons it will settle at about 60% capacity increase from zombie vehicles. And that the taxation system should be put in place now to prevent that from happening.
Right, so what's interesting on the trends, when we're looking at connected autonomous vehicles, is that we are going to face a terrible crunch. As autonomous vehicles do become available and on the roads, the point at which they account for 40% of vehicles on the road, we run the risk of chaos. Because autonomous vehicles work really well in an autonomous environment in which people are controlled. Because those of you who know Dan Ariely's work and predictably irrational, people are not rational, they do daft things. And actually, we're going to be seeing some very strange behavior. There's amazing videos online of looking at autonomous vehicles being tested and how much of a problem it is for them to deal with other vehicles. But there's another aspect on the autonomous vehicles. With regard to this platooning of better use of road space, At Surrey, we're coming to the end of a 5-year research project for Jaguar Land Rover on connected autonomous vehicles, in which we're looking at cybersecurity, connectivity across the vehicles, and security within systems. And one of the offshoots of that work is the development of algorithms that allow 12 cars to platoon on a motorway. So only the first driver needs to drive, the other 11 don't. The vehicles would actually all be steered in the same direction. And from a technology perspective, although it sounds quite miraculous, it's actually remarkably easy. The problem is that we tend to miss some of the core things. So just in terms of the trends, as we get excited about telecommunications, connectivity, what it can provide, we have to remember that 56% of A and B roads in the UK lack mobile coverage across all 4 operators. So either, even if you had 4 SIM cards working across all the networks, you still have problems in many parts of the country. And guess what? This is another thing where we get carried away almost by click and other media on technology. In most instances, you'll see the testing of autonomous vehicles in major urban environments. So if you go up to Stratford in London, you've got a centre there, and you've got these vehicles going around at 4 or 5 miles an hour, and pods, and they're marvellous. They're lovely, super duper things, just like you have at Heathrow with the pods from the car park across. It's not exactly mind-blowing, but anyway, they're working. The only problem is that most road journeys occur outside of cities. So the idea of having a pod trundling through Borden at 4 miles an hour, I'm sure would go down really well with everyone locally. Okay? It's just not looking. And what's fascinating here is, coming back to this localism, is that within regions, not just in the UK, elsewhere, within regions, many people are concentrated in major conurbations, major cities, and one of the problems is that if I go up to London regularly, see the glums, I sit in these august bodies and round tables and goodness knows what else, looking at the future of transport and connectivity. And if you use the R word is rural. If you use that inside the North Circular, it means a pub and a pond and Joe Grundy or whoever sitting on a bench, chewing a cud, watching the world go by. Now, as you all know in this area, that's not quite what happens around here. You've actually got Hampshire, which has the highest road mileage of any transport authority in the UK. 10 billion road miles. 10 billion. We've got 2 ports down Portsmouth, Southampton. You've got the M3, the A3. All Jaguar Land Rover cars from the Midlands that are exported from this country go down through Hampshire. Okay. All the fuel that is used at Heathrow, at Gatwick, and the other major airports in the south of the UK comes in to Southampton, where it is pumped by pipe to the individual airports. Okay. And then you have helicopters that are needing to monitor security. There's stuff going on around us that we don't even know. We are blind to our blindness. I come back to this localism. Now, the opportunities, how can that be used to one's advantage? Because if we're looking at these trends, you can personally, your business, can make an impact on the environment by looking at what can be done within your area. Looking at shopping locally. These small steps, when you look at the cost of logistics, the cost of goods in a store is not actually down to whether the till is manned or not. The cost, large parts of the cost, is the cost of opening and refilling boxes. So a container comes in. It is then shipped from the south coast up to the Midlands. From the Midlands, it's then shipped back down in smaller crates, which are then put into boxes, which are then sent out to retail stores, which then have to be opened to physically put the things on shelves. And then if you're looking at deliveries from stores with click and collect or whatever, they have to be taken off the shelves and repacked. The cost of putting things in boxes is astonishing. But we don't notice that. Let me come back though to this point, because we were just having a quick chat earlier. In terms of one of the other trends, it's amazing how there is a focus on cost reduction without recognizing value. I'll give you an example. If you run a bus service or a fleet of vehicles, vans, the cost of running the vehicle, 50% of the cost of running the vehicle is the cost of the driver. The other 50% is the cost of the vehicle, maintenance, and other running fees. If you're an accountant, and I don't mean this, I'm not having to get any accountants here, it would be pretty obvious that if you wanted to reduce the cost, you'd get rid of the driver. Autonomous vehicles sound really appealing, don't they? Now, the problem in this is that we get into equations and there seems to be a growing realization that there is a difference between cost and value. So if you look at a bus driver, the bus driver, okay, yes, does drive the bus. But that individual is also the information point, telling people where to go. He's the security guard. He's keeping an eye on people and behaviour. He's helping people who have difficulty getting on, keeping an eye on young children. A driver does a hell of a lot more rather than just being a cost. I sympathise with South Western Rail on the conductors, because the driver of the train can't actually look out of the side of the train. Okay, has got a clue what's going on within the train. It's interesting, this cost value, and a number of the models where technology has been seen as the answer, the panacea for all ills, creating this glorious efficiency, is actually misplaced. Using tills, self-service tills, seems to work very well in two particular environments. One is in urban environments where you have large convenience stores, you have a lot of people coming through just for a few items and they want in and out. That makes sense. It also appeals to younger shoppers. Why? Because, as has been shown by a lot of research, as we've seen that reduction in technology for communications and engagement, we have a younger generation that doesn't know how to have a conversation with another human being. So it's much easier to put a pair of earbuds in the ear and pretend that you're listening to something when you're not, as a defense mechanism to have no interaction with anyone else. Going to a self-service till, yes, can be quicker, but two, you don't have to talk to anyone. Until it goes wrong. But the interesting thing about this is that we are actually being steered, and I have to be careful here because I'm giving opinions here rather than, but quite frankly, I'm looking at trends, looking at insights and then seeing what's happening within this. One can start joining the dots quite easily. And while many companies are still pumping away at MailChimp and they're building their database, and they're going, say, oh, GDPR, whoa, we don't want GDPR, oh, it's a pain in the neck. Actually, it's exactly what we want as individuals. And actually, the engagement that's required is something that does need to be followed up. It's really funny how few people recognize the triggers for having connectivity with other people, connections with other people, just talking to them. And we see also there are certain words. In the past, we've seen quality, and quality was a major driver, particularly in the 80s and 90s. Those of you who ever dealt with total quality management, ISO 9000, all of the processes that went with it, quality is taken. But now innovation is seen as wonderful. Innovation is good. The problem is it's almost an assumption that it's somewhere else. Innovation means the application or exploitation of research. It doesn't mean just new. There's a process for innovation. But where are we applying it and what are the reasons for applying it? And that's where we've got a lot of challenges. Now, one of the questions that comes up is a new generation telecoms. What is the value of 5G? So let's give two answers for 5G. First one is, from a technology perspective, bright, shiny thing, far greater capacity, much shorter latency, the time taken for a signal to get somewhere and come back. That is a marvelous thing, okay? Because we have problems with capacity, but actually we've got bigger problems with coverage. We have problems with the energy consumed for telecoms networks. 5G enables virtualization within the network so that you have software-based, the ability to upgrade and do lots. It gives far greater flexibility so that you can have organizations that have their own virtual private networks within 5G because you can slice systems. This is one of the very appealing things. So that, for example, if you had a fleet of buses or a fleet of vehicles, the Royal Mail have got 39,000 delivery vehicles. Okay, now if you want to actually monitor all of those vehicles and how they're performing, the chances are that the supplier, the company that provided that vehicle, would like to sell that as a service to you. If you've actually bought them and you want to monitor it, you want to monitor your fleet, but you don't want to be sharing that data with other people, potentially. So therefore, you could actually have a virtual network just for your organization. 5G enables that to happen. And that's one of the reasons why people are very keen to drive it out. Another thing is another trend. And that is, when we look at disruption, we're seeing a number of large players that have had nicely regulated and protected markets suddenly facing more and more competition. Classic examples, banks. So financial institutions in the past, you had to be with one of the big banks, and that bank, most people would open an account and they'd stay with that for most of their lives. That has now changed as people realize the options available to them and they are swapping. Because the banks realize that the cost of someone in the branch is expensive, let's reduce the cost, not realizing that they were destroying any engagement that they had, and trust has been damaged accordingly. So we're seeing within the banking community a whole lot of parties realizing that what was safe to them in the past isn't safe any longer. New entrants are coming in, and some of those entrants are coming in surprising ways. A good example is that if you look at what PayPal did, and just as an example, PayPal wanted to get into the clearing system, but none of the banks would allow them in until PayPal realized that the only reason the banking system existed for clearance was because of the airline industry. So on the airline industry, if you were flying an aircraft in the early days to a foreign country, how the hell did you pay for fuel when your aircraft arrived, or food, or accommodation? They needed to be able to transfer money across borders amongst people. So they set up a network to facilitate these payments. That payment network was then used by various other parties. So if you actually look at all of the credit cards you've got in your pocket, look at your Visa card, look at your MasterCard, look at your American Express, look at your Diners card, and you'll see that the first digit on each of those cards is different because each of those companies is registered by that first number. PayPal discovered who had number one, and they signed an agreement. And PayPal were now on the clearance system without any of the banks being able to stop them. They discovered it, and what appears to be safe, protected, isn't. We have a similar situation starting to emerge in the telecoms era. So while governments are all looking at how they can auction bandwidth, in reality, we're seeing almost an open source movement developing in which infrastructure providers are facing competition from totally new areas. And if you are familiar, if you're interested in this space, look at things like the Telecom Infra project that's going on at the moment, which was set up, of course, by Facebook. There are a series of these patterns, trends going where what we've taken as being safe and secure aren't. Changes going on the whole time. It's very easy, however, to be taken in by the bright, shiny marketing BS and miss the underlying messages. So if you go back to that localism, quite apart from the impact you could have on your own carbon footprints, seriously explore the value of genuine collaboration. And collaboration doesn't just mean meeting up here once a week and having a cup of coffee and seeing how you are. Really explore, is there an opportunity to get synergies, to do things together? Because coming together, you're going to have far more impact than in trying to do everything on your own. Now, I could go on for far too long, okay? And I can see people kind of go glazing. Has anything I've said surprised you, or does anyone have any particular points you'd like me to go into in more detail?
Only as a human being, I get very suspicious about the new changes that I don't understand. I know it's about the ignorance, but like you've touched on it with PayPal creeping in by picking up the number of the number one bank. Well, I didn't know that. Then you think, how safe is any of it?
Right, so in terms of safety, thankfully, there are regulations in place, and PayPal is well regulated. The move by Facebook with Libra at the moment clearly has been challenged on a number of counts. And I think Google's move into payments has also raised a lot of concerns with regard to what's happening. So in terms of being worried about things, there are a lot of things we can be worried about. But we are living in a post-truth environment in which we see people buying into complete lies and fabrications. And I mean, here we are in the election at the moment, and it is simply astonishing to see what has been going on and also what is being held back. So the investigations into corruption around the referendum, the study that was due to be published on Russian interference, all of these things are going on, and they do cause fear. I think the question we have to address is, what on earth can we do about these different things? So number one is just checking your smart TVs, making sure you're not being monitored. If you've got Alexa or if you've got any other products in your home, just check what settings have you actually set, or are you encouraging Seattle to listen to whatever you're saying or doing? Some of you, might enjoy doing that, I don't know. But you've got an election coming up, you have the opportunity to get involved in certain questions and to raise the concerns rather than simply being fobbed off. Because we know that trust in politicians is appalling. We see trust in media as also appalling. Bizarrely, we're seeing trust in doctors struggling. Those that are trusted most at the moment seem to be scientists. How much of this is being driven by the environmental question? Don't know. But we are in this environment where actually we can do things, however small, we can actually impact those things. And also we're in an environment where because of economic uncertainty that exists, we see local authorities, I mean, we were talking earlier on playgroups. Local authorities have seen their budgets slashed. They are not getting support from central government or other sources. You know, looking at the bus services available here in Borden, the Future Skills Centre, you know, you've got 16-year-olds who've got a choice. If you're coming from Alton, which a lot of them do, you either turn up, I think it's 30 minutes before the first lecture or 35 minutes after the first lecture. Guess what most 16-year-olds do? Okay? So you have got extraordinary situations, and local authorities are desperate for help. And if they can get engagement with communities rather than people sitting there expecting everything to be done for them, we actually can make a far better place for ourselves. I did make a list. I will now refer to my notes on other things that I haven't covered.
Well, if we take a little break now, Mark,
Okay, marvellous. We can turn off the camera.
for more insights and some questions, yeah? Yeah? Okay.
Yeah? Brilliant.